Hello, friends.
Mark had been married to Amy for 10 years, and their life seemed perfect on the surface. They had 2 beautiful children, a comfortable home, and shared memories that should have cemented their bond forever. Mark loved Amy deeply, or at least, the version of her he thought he knew. For their 10th anniversary, he planned a surprise trip to Italy, a gesture he hoped would reignite the spark in their relationship. Amy had been busy with work lately, but her excitement at the surprise reassured him that they were still connected. One evening, while preparing for the trip, Mark decided to gather some old family photos from their shared laptop. He stumbled upon a folder named Receipts, which he assumed held tax files or mundane household expenses. Curiosity led him to open it, and what he found shook him to his core. Instead of financial documents, the folder contained screenshots of text messages between Amy and someone named Liam. The messages were intimate, flirty banter, shared jokes, and discussions of secret meetups. Mark's hands trembled as he read the words. Amy and Liam weren't just colleagues, they were lovers. It didn't take Mark long to connect the dots. Liam was Amy's boss, someone she often mentioned in passing as demanding but brilliant. The texts revealed that their affair had been ongoing for nearly a year, hidden behind the guise of late-night meetings and weekend business trips. Mark stared at the screen, the reality of his wife's betrayal sinking in like a cold blade. Unable to contain his emotions, he confronted Amy that same night. He waited until the children were asleep, then printed one of the texts and placed it on the dining table. When Amy walked into the room, she froze. Her face paled as she saw the printed page. "What's this?" she asked, her voice strained. Mark's voice shook as he spoke. "You tell me, Amy. How long has this been going on?" Amy's silence was deafening. She sat down slowly, her eyes fixed on the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she finally whispered. "It just happened." Her vague explanation only fueled Mark's anger. "Don't insult me with cliches," he snapped. "You planned this. You lied to me, to our kids. Do you even feel guilty?" Amy broke down, tears streaming down her face. She admitted that the affair had started during a particularly stressful period at work. She claimed she felt unappreciated at home and drawn to Liam's attention and charm. "He made me feel seen," she said, as if that excused her actions. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. Over the next few days, as the shock wore off, his anger turned into determination. He needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal. He began digging deeper, combing through their bank statements and phone records. What he found was worse than he could have imagined. Amy had used their joint savings to fund expensive dinners and hotel stays with Liam. She had lied about every business trip, spinning a web of deceit that left Mark questioning everything he thought he knew about her. The betrayal didn't end there. Mark confided in his best friend, Kyle, hoping for support, only to learn that Kyle had known about the affair for months. Kyle claimed he hadn't wanted to interfere, fearing it would ruin their friendship. This second betrayal left Mark reeling. Who else had known? Was everyone around him complicit in keeping this secret? Even their children weren't spared from the fallout. Their eldest, Emma, overheard an argument between her parents and began acting out at school. Mark and Amy tried to shield the kids from the details, but the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. Emma, once a bubbly and confident child, withdrew into herself, while their youngest, Noah, started asking why mommy and daddy weren't happy anymore. Mark's anguish deepened when he discovered that Liam wasn't just a philanderer but a serial manipulator. Liam had a history of preying on younger, vulnerable women in the workplace. Amy was just one in a long line of his conquests. Mark met Liam face to face once, desperate for answers. The man was smug, dismissive. "Amy chose me," he said with a smirk. "Maybe you should look at why." That interaction left Mark seething but also resolute. He sought legal advice, unsure whether to fight for custody of the children or attempt to salvage his marriage for their sake. Amy, sensing the gravity of her mistakes, begged for forgiveness. She admitted that she had wanted to end the affair months ago but claimed Liam had blackmailed her, threatening to expose their relationship if she cut ties. Mark didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman he had loved for 10 years was now a stranger to him, her actions casting a shadow over every memory they shared. Counseling sessions were tense and unproductive, filled with accusations and tears. Mark tried to focus on the children, pouring his energy into being a stable presence in their lives, but the weight of betrayal hung over him like a storm cloud. In the end, Mark realized that the life he thought he had was gone. Whether he chose to rebuild or walk away, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. After the confrontation, things between Amy and me remained tense, to say the least. I had hoped her tearful admissions meant she was serious about repairing what was left of our marriage. For the kids, if nothing else. But as the days passed, I started noticing small shifts in her behavior. Things that didn't add up. She became more guarded, her phone glued to her side like an extension of her hand. She'd set it face down on the table during dinner, a habit she never had before. And the way she jumped at every notification made my stomach churn with unease. She claimed she was cutting off all contact with Liam. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I told myself it was just my paranoia playing tricks on me, that her affair had left me hypersensitive to every move she made. But deep down, I knew better. Then there was Nick. Nick had been our friend for years, a loud, affable guy who could make himself at home anywhere. He was the type of friend who always seemed to know when there was food in the fridge or beer in the cooler. The kids adored him, and he'd always been great with them, so I never thought twice about his visits. That is, until he started showing up all the time. It began subtly enough. Nick would drop by unannounced, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd always been spontaneous. But then it became a pattern. He'd pop in while I was at work, leaving his car in the driveway longer than I was comfortable with. When I'd come home, Amy would be unusually cheerful, offering vague explanations like, "Nick stopped by to see the kids." It wasn't just his visits, though. It was the way Amy lit up around him. Her smile seemed brighter, her laugh louder. She'd lean in just a little too close when they talked, her body language far more relaxed than it had been with me lately. Meanwhile, Nick seemed to grow more comfortable in our house. Too comfortable. He'd plop onto the couch, feet up on the coffee table, like he lived there. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I'd been running errands all morning, and when I got home, Nick's car was in the driveway again. Stepping inside, I heard the faint hum of conversation coming from the kitchen. Amy and Nick were laughing over coffee, their chairs pulled close together. The way they stopped and stiffened when I walked in set every alarm bell ringing. "Hey, Mark." Nick greeted me with his usual carefree grin. "You're back early." "Yeah," I said slowly, my eyes darting between the two of them. "What's going on?" Amy stood up quickly, her movements stiff. "Nothing, Nick just came by to help me with the sink." She gestured vaguely toward the faucet. I glanced at it. It wasn't leaking. There wasn't a toolbox in sight. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't push it, not then, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier. That night, after the kids were in bed, I brought it up. "Why has Nick been here so much lately?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Amy hesitated, her eyes flickering away. "He's just been checking in. He knows things have been tough for us, and he's trying to help." "Help with what, exactly?" I pressed. "Mark, you're being ridiculous." Her voice sharpened, defensive. "He's our friend. Why are you acting like this?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, searching for something, anything, in her expression that might reassure me. Instead, she folded her arms and turned away, effectively ending the conversation. The next few weeks were unbearable. My suspicions about Amy and Nick consumed me. I found myself scrutinizing every interaction, every text message. Amy's phone was locked with a new passcode, and when I asked about it, she shrugged it off, claiming it was for privacy. Privacy. In our marriage. The word itself felt like a slap in the face. One evening, I came home to find Nick in the living room with the kids, playing a board game. Amy was in the kitchen, pouring wine. "Mark," she called cheerfully. "You're home just in time. Join us." I couldn't do it. I mumbled an excuse about a headache and went upstairs. Sitting on the edge of our bed, I tried to think rationally. Was I blowing this out of proportion? Maybe Nick really was just trying to be supportive. Maybe Amy's behavior was a result of guilt, not ongoing betrayal. But the shadows of doubt wouldn't leave me. A few days later, I decided I needed answers. That night, after Amy fell asleep, I went downstairs and grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She hadn't realized I'd figured out her new passcode. I scrolled through her texts, my heart pounding. The messages weren't with Nick. At least, not directly. But there were conversations with her best friend, Sarah, that made my blood run cold. "Nick's been so sweet lately," one read. "He really knows how to cheer me up. I don't know what I'd do without him." Another message from Sarah stood out even more. "Be careful, Amy. Don't let Mark catch on." I couldn't breathe. The betrayal I'd felt with Liam was fresh all over again, but this time it came with a deeper bitterness. This wasn't some distant affair conducted in secret hotel rooms. This was happening right under my roof, with someone I had trusted. I didn't confront Amy immediately. I needed time to process, to figure out my next move. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. How many more lies had I yet to uncover? The gnawing feeling in my gut wasn't going away. Every time I saw Nick's car in the driveway, every time I caught Amy laughing at something he said, it felt like someone twisting a knife in my back. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I was still reeling from Amy's betrayal with Liam, but deep down I knew. The signs were all there, just like before. But this time, I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof that would stop Amy from spinning excuses and calling me crazy. It started with her phone. Late one night, after Amy had fallen asleep, I crept downstairs and found her phone on the kitchen counter. She hadn't changed the passcode yet, a small victory in this war I hadn't asked to fight. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. Most were harmless. Chats with her colleagues, group texts with other moms from school. But then I saw Nick's name. The texts between them weren't outright incriminating, but they didn't sit right with me either. There were too many inside jokes, too many emojis, too much familiarity. One message caught my eye. "Today was fun. Can't wait for next time." Next time? I didn't know what they were talking about, but I knew it wasn't something she'd shared with me. Then, buried deep in their chat history, I found it. A photo Amy had sent him. A picture of herself at home, dressed casually but with her makeup done, her hair styled in a way that she hadn't bothered with for me in months. His reply was equally damning. "You look amazing. Wish I was there now." I sat there in the dark kitchen, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening between them. But I needed more than a few suggestive texts. I needed evidence that would force her to admit the truth. That's when I decided to set up cameras. The next day, I bought a few discreet, motion-activated cameras online. I felt sick installing them around the house. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the hallway outside our bedroom. This was my home, a place that was supposed to be built on trust and love, and now I was turning it into a surveillance zone. But I told myself it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, to protect my kids from the lies that were eating away at our family. The first few days yielded nothing. Amy and Nick's interactions were frustratingly normal. They chatted in the kitchen while the kids played, their conversations light and friendly. I began to doubt myself, to wonder if I'd crossed a line. But on the fourth day, the cameras captured everything. I came home late that evening, exhausted from work and traffic. Amy was upstairs putting the kids to bed, and I used the opportunity to check the camera footage on my laptop. At first, it was the usual, Amy cleaning up after dinner, Nick lounging on the couch with a drink in hand. But then, just as Amy sat down beside him, things shifted. They were talking softly at first, their words too quiet for the camera's microphone to pick up. Then Nick leaned closer, his hand brushing against her knee. Amy didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, a soft, shy smile I hadn't seen in years. My stomach twisted as I watched her lean in, their heads close together. And then the kiss. It wasn't a hesitant or fleeting kiss. It was deliberate, passionate. The kind of kiss that leaves no room for doubt about the feelings behind it. I watched in stunned silence as Nick pulled her closer, his hands on her waist, while Amy melted into him like she belonged there. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the kiss, it was everything it represented. Amy had looked me in the eyes and promised to change, to rebuild what she'd torn apart with Liam. And yet here she was, shattering it all over again, this time with a man I had trusted, a man who had been part of our family. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The image of them together played on a loop in my mind, each replay twisting the knife deeper. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't confront her right away. Not yet. I needed more than one piece of footage. I needed to know just how deep this went, how long they had been deceiving me. Over the next week, the cameras captured more than I ever wanted to see. Stolen kisses in the kitchen, whispered conversations in the hallway, lingering touches that spoke volumes. It was clear this wasn't a new development. Amy and Nick had been building this, whatever it was, for weeks, maybe months. And I'd been blind to it. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Sitting at the dinner table with them, forcing small talk while my heart ached and my stomach churned. Watching Nick play with my kids, knowing he was also playing me for a fool. I wanted to confront him, to throw him out of my house and tell him to stay the hell away from my family. But I held back. I needed to be smart about this. For the kids, if nothing else. One night, after the kids were in bed and Amy was in the shower, I sat down with the footage. Watching it again felt like pouring salt into an open wound, but I forced myself to go through it all. Every kiss, every touch, every shared look was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. When Amy finally came downstairs, I closed the laptop and looked up at her. She smiled at me, a smile that now felt like a lie, and said, "What are you doing up so late?" I shrugged, keeping my voice steady. "Just catching up on some things." She nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, and headed to bed. I stayed behind, staring at the dark screen of my laptop, my resolve hardening. I had the proof I needed. Now it was only a matter of deciding what to do with it. After confirming what I had long suspected, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Nick walk all over me. He'd wormed his way into my house, stolen moments with my wife, and smiled in my face like a friend while tearing my family apart. I wasn't just angry, I was furious. But I wasn't going to let that fury blind me. No, I was going to use it. Nick had made this personal, and I was determined to make him regret every second of it. Revenge wasn't my first thought, but as I watched him cozy up to Amy and parade around my house like he owned it, the idea started to grow. Nick had a partner, a longtime girlfriend named Lisa, someone he occasionally mentioned but never brought around. From what I'd pieced together over the years, their relationship was rocky, but they were still together. It didn't take much digging to figure out she had no idea about Nick's extracurricular activities. And then there was his business. Nick ran a small landscaping company, one he loved to brag about. He always talked about his loyal clients and how he'd built it from the ground up. I started with his partner. Lisa worked as a nurse at the local hospital. I didn't want to confront her directly, at least not yet. Instead, I reached out to her anonymously. I created a burner email account and sent her a message with just enough details to plant doubt. Dates when Nick was at my house, photos from the cameras showing him and Amy too close for comfort, and a screenshot of one of their flirtatious texts. I didn't go into specifics, just left her with enough breadcrumbs to start questioning him. A week later, I saw the fallout begin. Nick showed up at our house looking disheveled, his usual cocky grin replaced with a tight-lipped grimace. He barely spoke to me, heading straight for Amy. I stayed in the background, pretending not to notice as they whispered furiously in the corner. When he left, I checked the cameras. Sure enough, Amy had been comforting him, her hands on his shoulders, her face filled with concern. Whatever Lisa had said to him had shaken him up, and that was just the beginning. Next, I turned my attention to his business. Nick's company had a Facebook page, complete with glowing reviews from his clients. I scrolled through them, noting the names and businesses he worked with. It wasn't hard to find contact information for some of his larger clients. I drafted another email, this time posing as an unsatisfied customer. I claimed Nick had botched a major landscaping project at my property and refused to make it right. I included photos I'd found online of poorly maintained lawns and gardens, passing them off as his work. The first few emails didn't yield much, but eventually I started getting responses. A couple of his clients thanked me for the warning, saying they'd reconsider hiring him. One even mentioned they'd had some minor issues with him in the past and would be canceling their contract. I wasn't done yet. Nick was careless, too comfortable in his lies. It didn't take long to find out that he'd been evading taxes for years, underreporting his income to avoid paying his fair share. Armed with this information, I made an anonymous tip to the IRS. I didn't know how long it would take for them to act, but I was content knowing that Nick's actions were finally catching up with him. The final piece of the plan came together when I discovered that Nick had been flirting with more than just Amy. While digging through his social media accounts, I found messages to other women, clients, old friends, even strangers. It was a pattern, and one that I knew would destroy whatever was left of his reputation. I compiled screenshots of the messages and sent them to Lisa. This time, I didn't hold back. I wanted her to see the full extent of his betrayal. The aftermath was everything I had hoped for. Lisa broke up with him publicly, posting a scathing message on her Facebook page calling him out for his infidelity and deceit. She tagged him in the post, ensuring everyone in his circle saw it. His landscaping business started to crumble, with several clients leaving bad reviews and canceling contracts. And the cherry on top? The IRS began an audit, something I learned when Nick showed up at my house ranting to Amy about how someone was trying to ruin him. I watched his meltdown with cold satisfaction. He was unraveling, his arrogance replaced with desperation. Amy, of course, had no idea I was behind it all. She thought Nick was just having a run of bad luck, and I let her believe that. Let her comfort him, let her try to pick up the pieces of a life I had systematically dismantled. It didn't matter anymore. My marriage was already in shambles, but at least I could walk away knowing I hadn't gone down without a fight. One evening, as Nick was leaving our house after another of his pity visits, he turned to me. "You don't like me much, do you, Mark?" he asked, his tone accusatory. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. "Why would you think that, Nick? You're such a good friend." The sarcasm was thick, but he didn't call me on it. He just scowled and walked to his car, completely unaware of how much damage I had done. By the time everything was said and done, Nick was left with nothing. No business, no girlfriend, and no one to blame but himself. I hadn't just taken my revenge, I'd leveled the playing field. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't enough to fix my broken marriage or erase the pain Amy had caused, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't powerless. Nick had underestimated me, and he'd paid the price. After everything I'd uncovered, there was no going back. The betrayal had gone too far, and Amy's affair with Nick was only the latest chapter in a book filled with lies. I wasn't going to let her or Nick drag me down any further. For the sake of my sanity and for the kids, I knew what I had to do. It was time to end the marriage. I started by speaking with a lawyer, laying out everything I had. The texts, the camera footage, and even the financial records that showed how Amy had spent our money on her escapades. My lawyer was impressed by how thorough I'd been. "You've got everything you need here, Mark," she said. "This isn't just infidelity, it's misuse of marital funds. You're in a strong position." The next step was to quietly prepare my case. I didn't want to tip Amy off, so I continued playing the role of the dutiful husband, all while moving pieces behind the scenes. I set up a separate bank account and began transferring small amounts of money from our joint account, just enough to cover legal fees and start building a safety net for myself and the kids. I also changed the passwords on my personal accounts and gathered every document I could think of: tax returns, mortgage statements, and savings plans. One evening, while Amy was out running errands, I took the opportunity to sit Emma and Noah down. This was the part I'd been dreading most, explaining to them that their parents wouldn't be together anymore. Emma, being older, sensed that something had been wrong for a while. She listened quietly as I told them in the gentlest way I could. "Your mom and I have decided it's best if we live in separate houses," I said. "We both love you very much, and none of this is your fault." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I kind of figured," she said softly. Noah, on the other hand, didn't understand. He kept asking why we couldn't all just stay together. Each question felt like a dagger in my chest, but I did my best to reassure him. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. "But I promise, no matter what, you and your sister come first." The day I served Amy with the divorce papers was surreal. She came home from work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, and found me sitting at the dining table with a folder in front of me. "What's this?" she asked, her tone cautious. "It's over, Amy," I said, sliding the folder across to her. "I'm filing for divorce." Her face went pale as she opened the folder and saw the paperwork. "Mark," she stammered, "you don't have to do this. We can work through this." "No," I interrupted, my voice cold and steady. "We tried that after Liam. And while I was trying to forgive you, you were sneaking around with Nick. Don't insult me by pretending there's anything left to fix." She started to cry, but it didn't affect me the way it used to. I'd seen too much, endured too much, to be moved by her tears anymore. "You can't just give up on us," she pleaded. "Think about the kids." "I am thinking about the kids," I shot back. "They deserve better than to grow up in a house filled with lies and betrayal. And they deserve a father who respects himself enough to walk away from this." Amy's tears quickly turned to anger. "You're trying to punish me," she accused. "You're just being vindictive." "No, Amy," I said, standing up. "I'm being smart. I've got the evidence, and I've already spoken to a lawyer. This divorce isn't going to be on your terms." Over the next few weeks, things got ugly. Amy tried to guilt me, manipulate me, even threaten me, but I didn't waver. My lawyer filed the paperwork, citing infidelity and financial misconduct. The evidence I'd gathered ensured that the court would see things my way. I was awarded primary custody of Emma and Noah, with Amy getting visitation rights. The judge was sympathetic to my case, especially after reviewing the footage and messages. Financially, Amy didn't fare much better. The court agreed that her misuse of our joint funds was grounds for limiting her claim to spousal support. She fought tooth and nail for a larger share of our assets, but in the end, she walked away with far less than she'd hoped. The house went to me, and she was left with a small apartment across town. Watching her move out was bittersweet. Part of me still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, the mother of my children. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. As she packed her things, she looked at me one last time. "I never meant for it to end like this," she said quietly. "Neither did I replied. "But you made your choices, Amy. Now we both have to live with them." After she left, I sat in the empty house, letting the silence settle around me. It was strange, almost peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of her lies, her betrayal, it was gone. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially for Emma and Noah. But I also knew we'd be okay. I focused on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I poured my energy into my work, spent as much time as I could with the kids, and even started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and hurt. It wasn't about forgetting what Amy had done. It was about making sure her actions didn't define the rest of my life. As the months went by, things began to stabilize. The kids adjusted to our new routine, and I found a sense of purpose in being their rock. Amy and I managed to keep things civil for their sake, but our conversations were brief and businesslike. I didn't hate her anymore, I just didn't care. She was a chapter in my life that was closed, and I was ready to turn the page. In the end, the divorce wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. A chance to start over, to rebuild a life that was mine and mine alone. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free. The divorce had been a painful, drawn-out ordeal, but once the dust settled, I felt an overwhelming need to leave. The house, the town, even the memories, they all felt tainted by everything that had happened. I wanted a clean slate, not just for me but for Emma and Noah. They deserved a fresh start as much as I did. So, with the ink on the divorce papers barely dry, I began looking for a new place to call home. We ended up in a small, quiet town about 2 hours away. It wasn't too far from where we used to live, but it was far enough that Amy and her drama wouldn't loom over us anymore. The town had a slower pace, the kind of place where people greeted each other at the grocery store and kids rode bikes without a care in the world. It felt safe, unassuming, exactly what we needed. The house I found wasn't anything extravagant, but it had charm. A 2-story craftsman with a big backyard for the kids and a porch swing that I imagined myself sitting on during quiet evenings. Moving in was hectic, But there was something cathartic about unpacking boxes and putting things in their new places. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, felt like another step toward reclaiming my life. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Emma, ever the resilient one, made friends at her new school almost immediately. Noah, with his endless energy, loved the backyard and quickly latched onto the neighborhood kids. Seeing them smile, hearing their laughter, it was the first time in months I felt like I'd made the right decision. It was during one of those chaotic early days, while I was struggling to assemble a new dining table, that I met Jules. She lived a few houses down and had introduced herself casually when she saw me wrestling with the table pieces on the porch. "Need a hand?" she asked, smiling as she leaned against the railing. I was hesitant at first. The last thing I wanted was to drag a stranger into my mess, but Jules had this easygoing way about her, the kind of energy that made you feel like everything would be okay. Before I could decline, she stepped onto the porch and started helping. She had a knack for putting things together, both literally and figuratively, and within an hour, the table was standing sturdy in my dining room. Jules was unlike anyone I'd met before. She was kind without being overbearing, funny without trying too hard. She didn't pry into my past, though I'm sure she could sense there was a story there. Instead, she focused on the present, offering tips about the town, recommending the best pizza place, and even pointing me to a good therapist when I mentioned wanting to work on myself. We started seeing more of each other after that. At first, it was simple neighborly kindness, her lending me tools, me helping her carry groceries. But over time, our conversations grew longer, more personal. I learned that Jules had moved to the town a few years ago after going through her own divorce. "Small town life has a way of healing you," she said one evening as we sat on my porch swing, watching the kids play in the yard. I opened up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. I told her about Amy, about the betrayal and the divorce, about the guilt I carried over how it had affected Emma and Noah. She listened without judgment, offering quiet encouragement when I needed it most. Jules had a way of seeing the good in people, even when I struggled to see it in myself. Spending time with Jules felt effortless, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me that life could be simple and good. It wasn't long before the kids warmed up to her too. Noah adored her, always asking when Miss Jules was coming over. Emma, guarded at first, eventually opened up, drawn to Jules's genuine warmth. But it wasn't just the connection with Jules that helped me heal. Moving to this town forced me to slow down, to focus on what really mattered. I started taking Noah to soccer practice, something I'd always been too busy for before. Emma and I made a tradition of Sunday hikes, exploring the trails near the edge of town. I even took up woodworking, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago, finding solace in the rhythm of shaping something with my hands. The therapy Jules had suggested turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd made. For the first time, I confronted the anger, the pain, and the self-doubt that had been festering since Amy's first betrayal. My therapist helped me see that the failure of our marriage wasn't solely mine to bear, that it was okay to let go of the guilt and focus on building something new. As the months passed, my life started to feel like my own again. Jules became a steady presence, but there was no rush to define what we were. We were just two people who had been through the ringer, finding comfort in each other's company. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Jules and I sat on the porch swing again, sipping wine under the glow of string lights I'd hung earlier that week. She looked at me and said, "You're doing a great job, you know." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Some days it doesn't feel like it." "Mark," she said, her tone serious now. "You moved your family to a new town, you're showing up for your kids every single day, and you've managed to rebuild your life after everything you've been through. That's more than most people could do." Her words stuck with me long after she left that night. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe she was right. Maybe I was doing okay. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It was real and it was mine. As I watched the kids sleeping peacefully that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope for the future, for the life we were building here, for the possibility of happiness. I didn't know what the road ahead would hold, but I knew I wasn't walking it alone anymore. And that made all the difference.
Bye-bye.